Hey guys, so our recording was not being super awesome today. My computer was having a lot of difficulties. I am having to re-record the first few minutes of this lecture. We're gonna go through the slides and then you'll notice like it'll kind of cut and then it'll kind of get on to like our morning Zoom call. Today we're talking about chapter 10, and then we'll do chapter 11, but that'll only be a Zoom call. But we're looking at chapter 10, which is your resistance training. We aren't going to get into like the numbers or anything like this. Like this isn't big chart day or anything like that. We are just going to be able to describe like how the body responds to resistance training, right? Like all the things we're trying to achieve through strength training. So we need to be able to describe like a lot of terms. A lot of these are like vocabulary questions that often come up on your exam. So we're going to make sure that we get a lot of definitions covered in today's lesson. So one of them that we're going to be looking at is general adaptation syndrome, which is going to describe how our bodies respond and adapt to stress. We'll talk about the principle of specificity again, which we have talked about in the past. But basically, you know, we all know that we want to be as specific as possible when we are designing a program. The stages of resistance training, which obviously we're going to go over, and then how to pick the right exercises within those stages. So first thing we're starting off with, we're talking about that principle of specificity, right? That's our SAID principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. And what this principle states is that the body will adapt specifically to whatever stress you place upon it. So if you lift heavy weight, you're going to get good at lifting heavy. If you lift lightweight for a lot of reps, you're going to get really good at endurance, right? So there are three kind of subcategories of specificity here. There is mechanical specificity, which when you're considering like how to be specific, you need to consider the weight, like how heavy you're lifting, and the movement that you are choosing. So if you're trying to develop like a strong chest, you're going to pick heavy weight and chest exercises. So that's what we have here. If an individual wants to develop maximal strength in their chest, they should perform heavy chest exercises. So the heavy is the mechanical specificity, and then the body part is also mechanical specificity. Then if we're looking at neuromuscular specificity, that is going, and there's the word specificity a lot today, that is going to be the speed of the contraction and your exercise selection. So now we're not necessarily looking at exercise selection well in the sense that we're talking body parts. Now we're talking exercise selection in, are we picking a stable exercise? Are we picking a light exercise? Or I'm sorry, an unstable exercise. So this is going to be the speed of contraction. So if an individual wants to develop maximal strength, the speed, you're going to try to perform it as explosively as possible to take advantage of those stretch shortening cycles and take advantage of like as much motor unit recruitment as possible. But you're also always going to ensure, like if you're trying to develop maximal strength, that you are lifting in a stable environment, right? So that's neuromuscularly very stable so that you can recruit only those prime movers to get the job done. Then we also have our metabolic specificity, which is the energy demand placed on the body. So if an individual wants to develop maximal strength in their chest, they should perform low repetitions, right? The metabolic specificity is like you're going to pick a low number of reps, which means you're going to need to do a high number of sets in order to have enough training volume to experience growth. And your rest period is part of this as well. So because you're lifting super heavy, you're going to want to make sure that you take maximal rest. So in the end, if we're considering our SAID principles, if I were to like try to create my own OPT template, right? Mechanically, I would lift at an intensity of probably 85 to 100% of my 1 rep max. I would choose whatever body part I'm training for. I would make sure that I'm doing an explosive contraction. I'm trying to move as quickly as I can, even if that means that I'm not necessarily actually moving fast. I'm trying to push really hard and quickly. And I'm going to do that in a stable environment to ensure that like I can lift as heavy as possible. And I'm going to do it for a low number of repetitions with a whole bunch of rest in between each of my sets. And I'm going to do that for a high number of sets so that I get an overall good training volume. So maybe 5 sets of 5 at 85% of my 1 rep max with 3 minutes of rest in between every set. Let's go ahead and flip it around. We'll give an exact opposite example. So let's say I'm trying to develop like endurance in my chest, right? I would pick chest exercises for lightweight. That would be my mechanical specificity. I would do slow repetitions neuromuscularly, and I would do them in an unstable environment. So I'd pick a slow, kind of wobbly chest exercise. And then metabolically, I would perform a high number of repetitions for a low number of sets in order to get the right amount of training volume. Then I would take minimal rest because, again, I'm trying to develop endurance. So that is sort of the things that we consider when it comes to our SAID principle, right? Now, another really important principle is the principle of overload. Arguably, this is one of our most important. This is where like working out really kind of comes in. But the principle of overload states that tissues need to be overloaded in order for them to experience adaptation. You must work at intensities that are high enough to trigger the body to go, oh no, I'm not very good at that. I need to like develop more muscle to get good at that, right? You need to tell your body to adapt to a specific stress, which means that stress needs to be challenging enough. So a program should continually raise the difficulty so that the body continues to adapt to higher and higher levels of stress. That is what we refer to as the principle of overload if you're asking NASM, but most people call that progressive overload. And basically it's just like, oh, as soon as you're good at something, you make it harder, and now you're not good at it anymore, so your body knows that it needs to adapt. Then it gets good at it, then you make it harder so that your body says it needs to continue to adapt. And that's progressive overload. Now there's also the principle of variation here, which are planned variations. When it comes to program design, you want to make sure you're not always doing the same thing over and over and over again. This is where periodization comes in, which is a big focus of this course. We're going to do a whole day on periodization, and then later today we're going to talk about like a couple different training examples of like training splits. Although it's going to be only a preview today, we'll get into the actual nitty-gritty of it later. But the principle of variation states that like when you are continually changing things up, your body has to continue adapting because it doesn't get used to any one specific type of stress. So that's another way of ensuring that you are applying the principle of overload effectively by continually adding variation. Now, there's a couple of other principles in here that honestly are not some things that you get tested on, so we didn't put them in your notes today, but the principle of individualization is another one. And basically that just means that like when you're writing a program, you should be considering the individual needs of your client, like their age, their medical history, what their sport is. But again, if you go back to the SAID principle and you're being specific, you're definitely going to be applying individualization. So I don't think this needs to be really its own little principle that we have to memorize. And NASA apparently agrees because they don't ask you about it. There's also the principle of adaptation, which is stating that human beings are very, very, very adaptable, right? Like we are very good at adapting to specific types of stress. And so that's where we're going to get into this general adaptation syndrome in just a second, which will be what we actually pick up as I'm going to end this part of the recording. So this is going to be a really weird little time skip, and it's going to go back in time and then get back on the Zoom call. So this is just the stuff that I wanted to kind of fill everybody in on who's watching the recordings, because the freaking Zoom call got all messed up this morning. So you're going to see this cut together here in just a second. So we'll see you in a bit. And that is our second crash of the day. So if this happens again, we will be seeing a full recording for the rest of the day. But let's try to get through this quickly before it goops up again. All right, so general adaptation syndrome describes how your body responds and adapts to stress, made of 3 stages. The first one is the alarm reaction. And the alarm reaction is the initial reaction to a stressor, right? So I'll give you a couple examples here. The one that NASM likes to test you on is they're like, what's an example of alarm reaction? DOMS, right? DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness, is an example, right? But also like maximal motor units being recruited during a heavy lift is also an example. right? So like your body literally, like, you know, when you're in the gym and you get that like kind of trembling sometimes because you're just like super amped up, that's an initial reaction. Even just adrenaline getting pumped through your body as you start lifting heavy, that's an example of alarm reaction. And then we also have resistance development, which is going to be an increased functional capacity to a stressor. So your body developing greater strength due to heavy lifting is an example, right? So your body literally like, you know, getting stronger over a few weeks as your 1 rep max starts to climb. That's an example of resistance development. So we really want to stay in these first 2 stages of general adaptation syndrome. We're trying to create alarm reactions, which trigger resistance development. So then we give a greater alarm reaction, which triggers a greater resistance development. And that's sort of how we're continually like periodizing that variation in order to get that overload. So we are trying to stay in the first 2 phases of general adaptation syndrome. The last one we want to avoid at all costs. So the exhaustion stage is the final part of a general adaptation syndrome. And this is prolonged stress causes staleness or injury, right? So prolonged intolerable stress leads to an eventual breakdown of a system. And so like plateauing in the gym or in weight loss, that's actually an example of exhaustion. Or like muscle strains or pulls or tears. Those are also all examples of like exhaustion. So we're trying to avoid that as much as we can. We don't want to experience an injury due to like prolonged stress, right? So if we know that like we're trying to stay in these 2 stages and we know that the body eventually adapts to things, like plateauing is an example of that exhaustion stage, then planned variation is an essential part of like any training program. We want to make sure that we are cycling through different phases of the OPT. We're using different types of strength training. And it doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be into like totally completely different exercises. Like you don't have to go from like being a runner and then go do surfing for your cardio and then switch to becoming like a cyclist in order to like continue seeing adaptation. Although I think that if you do that, you're going to be one heck of a general athlete. You know, it's not like these changes have to be totally intense, but like, you know, switching things up, like if you're a runner, switching things up between doing like a 1-to-1 ratio for like your interval training to doing like a 1-to-2 ratio, that's a big difference. With twice as much rest, you're able to work twice as hard during your you know, higher intensity periods. That little bit of variation is enough to get your body to go, oh man, this is totally different. I need to like, you know, adapt in order to overcome this different type of stress. Or working on hills for 4 weeks and then working on sprints for 4 weeks. Those are 2 different types of training. So when it comes to like developing an outcome, you need to design a program that sort of works through that entire continuum, right? You need to make sure that you're working through whatever adaptations are specific to your athlete's sport. So resistance training, for instance, you're going to focus on stabilization and endurance, or maybe you're focusing on like power output. But this is where, when we talk about resistance training, and we've been talking about like why the OPT model is the way it is, it's because it's taking advantage of all of the said principles, and it's taking advantage of an understanding of how our body responds to overload, and it is the best of general adaptation syndrome. So we're going to train for stabilization and endurance, hypertrophy, strength, and power. Those are sort of the 5 key things that we're looking at. So if we look at like general adaptations and how they relate to the OPT model, actually, I think that should be capitalized. we are going to look at stabilization first. This is going to be like adaptations focused on dynamic support and maintaining posture, right? So when we look at like trying to develop stability, what we are really looking for is the ability to isolate and stabilize our joints. Whereas like endurance, right? And so that would be, actually we'll put that under the stabilization level adaptations, right? That's very much what we're looking for. If we look at strength level adaptations, we're going to look at muscular endurance, right, which would be our strength endurance phase. And that's really focusing on being able, adaptations focused on maintaining high levels of force production over extended periods of time. So a little bit different than what it says here, but like strength endurance is all about like, it is still high force, like it's still strength, you know, it's heavy, heavy weight, but you are trying to kind of get the best of both worlds here. You're trying to maintain it over long periods of time. So again, looking at those type 2A fibers, or maybe type 1 fibers if it's like really high levels of endurance. And then we have hypertrophy, which is adaptations focused on the development of muscular size. So like when you're looking at hypertrophy, we're looking at gains with a capital Z, right? We are really looking at like developing like maximal like muscular size. You are literally doing the things that result in larger skeletal muscle fibers. Oh, I forgot this PowerPoint goes weird. I fell into this trap last time I taught this class. Yeah, it goes into strength here. This is maximal strength here. So maximal, like straight up like force production. So maximal strength. If we're looking at that as an adaptation, this is literally adaptations focused on the development of muscular tension in order to overcome external forces, right? This is really sort of the main adaptation that a lot of people think of when they think of developing like strength, right? They tend to think of like maximal strength. Now we know that obviously there's other types of strength. There's enduring strength and there's you know muscular size adaptations. But strength in general, just like maximal strength, is literally the ability to produce internal tension to get something from point A to point B once, you know, like once or twice, like real heavy. That is like strength. And so maximal strength adaptations are all about like developing that at its highest levels. And then we have our power level adaptations, right? Where we are going to be literally just working on muscular power. And that is all about like adaptations focused on the greatest amount of force generated in the shortest amount of time possible. So very similar to maximal strength. Like power and max strength are very similar in concept. They're both about developing maximal levels of force. But where maximum strength is really just all about that max force, but it doesn't really care about how fast it happens. Power is all about generating that maximal force in the shortest amount of time possible. Obviously, like this is going to be built on the foundation of this, and strength is built on the foundation of stability, right? And this is where like a lot of other certifications don't really break things down the way NASM does. Like NASM really breaks down these 5 distinct variations here, whereas most training programs focus on like, they often use like endurance as stabilization because higher repetitions is something that results in like stability being formed. And so like these, usually most other certifications or most traditional ways of teaching strength training are really focused on high repetitions, which is the same as NASM, right? Like 12 to 20 repetitions. But they are focusing, they don't really put as much emphasis on unstable environments. They focus on like total body movements very similarly, but they don't quite do all of the like high levels of stability that NASM does. And then there really isn't hypertrophy all broken down by itself. Instead, like you have working for just strength in general, and we know that slightly higher repetitions will be result in hypertrophy, whereas the lower repetitions will be strength. And then power is very similar to NASM, except that it doesn't do the supersetting technique. It just does explosive contractions by itself. So a lot of other certifications still focus on these these three key things, like stability, strength, and power, but they're pulled apart into like phase training very differently than the other certifications that are out there. And so it's a lot easier to be very progressive. Now, we're going to look more at this later. These are going to be your resistance training systems, but I want to get these out in your notes so you can get familiar with them. Again, these are going to be some definitions here. You can use all of or none of these systems. They all still can, but no matter what, they all still should follow the regular OPT rules that we're going to be looking at later in this course. So when I say resistance training system, what I mean is I'm talking about things like circuit training or pyramid training or supersets as a technique, right? These are different systems that you can incorporate as long as you're still following all of the other rules within the OPT model. So resistance training systems are basically ways for you to kind of group up your sets and reps and things like that. So we have the first one here, which is a single set system, right? And the single set system is literally as basic as it sounds. It's one set of repetitions per exercise. So this would literally be something like, this is a really great way for beginners to get into strength training, where you might introduce them to a lot of different exercises, and they only really do one set per exercise of each of those things. Really good for beginners, really good for seniors, to make sure that you're not overtaxing them. And that way, like, you're not doing too much of the same stress for the same body part, resulting in like too much soreness. But generally, multi-set systems are what we are going to focus on 99 out of 100 times. And so multiple set systems are probably what you just kind of default think of when you think of strength training. And multiple set system is exactly like it sounds. It is multiple sets of each exercise. We know that if you're working for maximal strength, for instance, a single set system is not a very effective way to do that, because it's just not enough stress for the body to like adapt to that. It's a great way to like burn some calories, not a great way to adapt for strength. Multiple set systems are a much better way to adapt for strength, because you are going to be continually giving your body the same type of stress, and so your body gets repeated exposure to that stress and learns how to adapt to it over time. Then we have a really fun one. We have pyramid systems here. So pyramid system is actually where you're going to do is going to be like 4 to 6 sets of an exercise, and then you have like a classic pyramid, which is going to go light to heavy, and then you have a reverse pyramid, which is going to go heavy to light. And so pyramid training is either an increase or a decrease in weight each set, okay? So that's, I actually should put that here. It's either an increase or a decrease in weight each set. So for example, you might do a pyramid training. I'll pull up a picture here. Lord knows I'm tempting fate right now by actually opening up another program on my computer that is acting like a jerk today. Try not to blow up, computer. So here is actually a really good example. Here's like your first set might be 2 to 4. This is a reverse pyramid going heavy to light. And so you would do 2 to 4 repetitions near your maximum intensity, and then your next set, you would rest like normal. This isn't like, it's not like you're just going like really quickly here. That would actually be an example of drop setting. But pyramiding would be like 2 to 4 repetitions, super, super heavy. And then your next set, you would reduce the weight, maybe by 10%. So you take some of the plates off and then finish your rest and then do your next set. But you're going to do, because you took the weight off, you need to raise some of your repetitions. So now you're going to do 4 to 6 repetitions instead of 2 to 4. Then you take some more weight off and you do 6 to 8 repetitions. And you're going to do that for anywhere between 4 to 6 sets. Pyramid training is a great way to bust a plateau if you've been stuck on like your 1 rep max for a while and you're just like not getting any stronger. Pyramid training can be a really great way to get your body to adapt to that. So pyramid training is typically used in a lot of like maximum strength situations. Internet's being a jerk. I'm gonna close this just in case it blows up my whole computer. So pyramid training is really effective for maximum strength programs, and it's really effective for hypertrophy programs. Those are really good. Then we also have like a superset system. And that is actually going to be performing one exercise or performing 2 exercises in rapid succession with no rest in between. So an example of this would be, I'm actually going to use an example that doesn't show up later in our strength and endurance style, but supersets could be an example of like pairing a dumbbell chest press with a bent over row with no rest in between the two. Okay, so you would do a bench press, you would do a chest press, and then you would immediately turn over and grab those dumbbells and do like a bent over row, right? That's a superset. Then once you're done with the row, set the dumbbells down, rest for your set, and then you can go back to that chest press after 60 seconds of rest or so. These are really good for hypertrophy, and they're really good for strength, for endurance. This is where like the strength endurance style of training comes in, by utilizing supersets that pair the same muscles together. So if you were to do like a max strength movement followed by a stabilization movement, like let's say you're set up with like a weight bench near a TRX suspension trainer, you would do like a super heavy chest press, set those dumbbells down, immediately grab that TRX and do like some TRX chest presses, right? That is strength plus stability. That's a great way to develop your endurance. And it is really good for hypertrophy too, because of like the metabolic stress of it. So then we also have circuit training. Circuit training is awesome because it's a super efficient way to work out. So that is a series of exercises with limited to no rest in between each exercise. So circuit training is really great because like that's a great way to kind of burn a lot of calories by continuing to work so rapidly and staying under stress that entire time. You just keep your calorie burn really high. Circuit training is a great way to do your cardio without actually having to go and do cardio. It's very much a cardio form of like weightlifting. And then and a variation of that is going to be peripheral heart action circuit training, which is a variation of circuit training that alternates between upper body exercises and lower body exercises. Right, so that's a good example of peripheral heart action systems. By the way, I'm going to give you guys examples of all of these when we do our periodization day. Like when we sit down to like talk about like how to write some example programs, we're going to do variations of these things. So if you're wondering like, hey, can I get an example of that? I promise it's coming up. Now, this is different. Like all of these things are things that you do within your workout itself. The next one we're going to talk about is a resistance training system, but it is not a system in the sense that like you use it during your workout. It's a thing that you do when you're designing like your program. And so what a split routine system is where you train different specific body parts on different days of training. So this is what you think of when you think of like your training split. So when you describe somebody who's doing like chest, legs, back as their training split, like they have a workout A, a workout B, and a workout C. They have 3 totally different workouts that they're going to do over the course of the week. That's a split. That's their training split. They're on a 3-day split. I like 3-day splits. They're great. You could do a 4-day split. Maybe you decide to train upper body, like chest, shoulders, and back on one day, and then you do quads, hamstrings, glutes, calves on another day, and then you're getting core training like spread between the two because it's in your movement prep. So that would be like an upper body, lower body split. The cool thing about an upper body, lower body split is you can train those body parts twice per week. You would do upper body on Monday, lower body on Tuesday, do cardio on Wednesday, upper again on Thursday, lower again on Friday. That is one of my all-time favorite splits. And that would be you would only have 2 workouts, but you would do those 2 workouts twice per week. So you have a 2-day split that you're doing twice per week. And that's how you would kind of describe that. There's the bro split, which is the classic like 5-day split. Chest, shoulders, back, legs, and like arms and abs. There's a lot, I'm gonna attempt fade again here. There's a lot of examples of training splits. I'm gonna go to Google Image because I'm sure there's charts out there. Yeah, here's a 6-day training split: legs and abs, chest, shoulders, tries, back and bis, legs and abs again, chest, shoulders. Oh, so this is actually not a 6-day split. This is a 3-day split twice per week. This is a great split, actually. This is the chest, back, legs routine that I mentioned earlier. And that's a really, really good one. Here's a full body split. You could do a full body workout. Now, you could have, it would still be considered a 3-day split if you had a workout A, workout B, and workout C, and they could all be total body exercises the entire time. That's actually one of my favorite ways to do stabilization routines, and that's one of my favorite ways to do undulating routines. And we'll talk a little bit more about undulating routines later, but basically that's actually where you don't train in level 1, level 2, or level 3 for the month. You actually train in all 3 levels, but on workout A, you train for stabilization, workout B, you train for strength, workout C, you train for power. So they would all be full body workouts, but this would be stabilization, this would be strength, and this would be power. There's the upper lower split. Here's the 5-day. They're calling it the bodybuilder split. We all know it's the bro split. Chest, legs, arms, back, shoulders. And then there's like a custom split, right? This would be like a 6-day situation where, you know, you have like cardio and abs on one day, your back, legs, biceps, rest, back, and legs again. Like if you need to work on these 2 things more than the rest of your body, there's no reason you can't throw a little bit of resistance that way. Just what you want to make sure you're always doing when you're considering a training split is you are spreading out your volume over the week. As long as you are getting 10 to 20 sets per body part, you're going to be fine when it comes to training splits. They're not as complicated as people make them out to be. Like people get really caught up in like, oh, I got to make sure I choose the right split. Look, as long as you are like spreading your volume out 10 to 20 sets per week, you're going to be just fine. The reason we like training, like let's say you're aiming for 20 sets per body part, right? Like that's a lot of sets, right? So let's say I'm trying to, you know, strengthen my legs. I want to get 20 sets for my legs. So I'm doing a max strength routine. So I'm hitting 5 sets per body part, right? So that means I need 4 exercises over the course of the week to get my 20 sets, right? 5 sets here, 5 sets there, 5 sets there, 5 sets there. Squat, deadlift, walking lunges, step up, right? There's my there's my 4 exercises, 5 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, right? Cool, I hit my 20 sets for my legs. Now, if I did that all on one day, if I did like a heavy barbell squat on one day, and then I follow it up that same day with a super, super heavy like deadlift, followed by super heavy walking lunges, followed by super heavy step ups, that could be fine. But do you think my step ups, you know, they're last on the list? Do you think that their 5th set is going to be the same quality as like my squats were in the beginning? Probably not. Like I'm probably starting to get into what we call junk volume, which is where like I'm so exhausted, my form is starting to break down. I'm probably not moving the way I should be. So what if instead of having like a super just all ultra leg day, what if I paired my leg exercises with like my upper back and I have like a leg / back day and I move half of my leg volume to another day. So I have like legs and back, and then I have like legs and chest on another day, right? And so now I'm doing like a total body split. So I would do like my heavy barbell squat with my walking lunges. That would be my workout A on Monday. Then Thursday comes around and I have my heavy deadlift paired with like my heavy step up to balance on Thursday. So I'm getting the same training volume over the course of the week. I'm still hitting that optimal 10 to 20 sets per body part, but I've spread them out. Meanwhile, on my upper back day, same concept, right? I was doing heavy pull-ups, heavy bent over rows, heavy seated rows, heavy lat pull down. It's like all of that on one day. I might end up like, you know, by the end of it, I'm like moving my body a lot, like not using my upper back anymore, right? Heavy bench press, heavy dumbbell chest press, heavy incline dumbbell chest press, heavy chest flies, you know, like all of that. By the end of my chest flies, I'm probably sacrificing my form a little bit. So if I spread that volume out over 3 total body workouts instead of like one workout where I'm just pounding one muscle group in, the other thing is like I'm going to be really sore in each of those body parts after the end of those workouts. Whereas if I spread it out, I'm going to reduce my soreness. So if I'm an athlete and I'm doing like SAQ workouts on my other days, I'm going to be really sore on like one. So now I'm not getting a very effective workout, you know, the day following my super heavy leg day or something. So by spreading that out, I'm doing a split routine that's taking into account my overall total volume. There's really no right answer here when it comes to split routines. There's just a few more optimal ways to weigh things out depending on how many sets you're doing. Now, if you're doing like a limited number of sets, like I was talking about 5 sets, if I was doing like a limited number of sets, like 1 to 2 sets per body part, I'm sorry, 1 to 2 sets per exercise, well, then I can do more exercises per workout, you know? And that makes sense because those are going to be associated with my working on endurance. I'm going to do a higher number of repetitions. So my training volume is going to be laid out very differently. We'll be looking at some examples of this when we build some example programs later on. So 2 other systems that we've got are going to be examples of what we call vertical loading. A vertical loading system, which is moving down the OPT template for your sets. So this is the classic example that you guys have seen me do like a million times in class, but that is going to ruin my internet. There we go. This is going to alternate body parts for each set. So what you would do is like, let's say you're hitting, I will give an example of this one because that's sometimes confusing. Let's say you are hitting, you're going to do 3 sets of 12 reps for each exercise, and you're choosing to do, you've got a chest, back, and leg exercises. So what you would do is you would do set 1. Your example of this would be like set 1 for chest, set 1 for back, set 2 for chest, then you would rest. Then you would do set 2 for chest, set 2 for back, and set 2 for, I did chest twice. legs. And then you would rest. And then you would do set 3 for everything. Oh, whoops. So that is an example of what we call vertical loading. You wouldn't be doing straight sets. It's almost like a circuit, but you are allowed to take your rest if you want to. This is kind of an example where it's like circuit style, but if you were to do set 1, rest, set 2, set 1, rest, set 1, rest, that would be an example of vertical loading. Horizontal loading is where you do set 1 for your chest, set 2 for your chest, set 3 for your chest, then you move on to your back exercises. So that is what we call horizontal loading. One is a version of moving down the OPT this way. One is a version of moving down the OPT that way. So horizontal loading is definitely more common. And that is all sets of a specific exercise before moving on to the next one, right? Definitely most common, right? And so you would do chest, back, and leg exercises. And so you would do, and we'll do 3 sets of 12 again. Okay, so you would do set, oh my God, set 1 chest, set 2 chest, set 3 chest, then you would move on set 1 back, set 2 back, set 3 back, set 1 legs, set 2 legs, set 3 legs. So 1 is moving, you can see like, you know, if I'm looking at my chest stuff, I went 1, 2, 3, I went vertical versus 1, 2, 3, I went horizontal. That's why they're called horizontal versus like vertical loading. All right, so last little bit here that we're gonna do is we gotta get our program design, program design principles of resistance training. So we are going to look at the stabilization, which is going to be level 1, which is phase 1, right? Exercise selection is going to be resistance stabilization exercises. Now, it's never going to be called resistance stabilization. It's going to be called chest stabilization, shoulder stabilization, back stabilization, bicep stabilization, tricep stabilization, or leg stabilization exercises. Right? Like that is what we mean when we say resistance. We are talking about the body part that you're training. So this follows the same like naming scheme as like core stabilization, balance stabilization, reactive stabilization, except that those are like concepts of athleticism, whereas resistance exercises are body parts, right? So that's what we're going to choose there. And then these exercises involve, so these are resistance exercises that use unstable, controlled environments to develop stability, right? So, and neuromuscular efficiency. So when you're looking at it, when you're looking at like how to define like a resistance stabilization exercises, they are exercises that use, you know, unstable environments. That's how to spot them in the wild, right? So our example would be something like stability ball chest press, right? That's a classic example of a stabilization level chest exercise. Then we got our strength level, right? It's going to be level 2, aka phases 2, 3, or 4. And your exercise selection is going to be resistance strength exercises, right? These exercises involve, please, just fingers work. Stable environments with heavy, actually, we can just honestly leave that alone. Stable environments that move muscles through a full range of motion, right? So you're really focusing on a full range of motion and you're lifting generally pretty heavy here. Example would be a bench press. So a stability ball chest press was very unstable. A bench press is very, very, very stable. And then your power level, that level 3, phase 5, right? Your exercise selection is resistance power exercises, okay? So resistance power exercises are exercises that focus on rate of force production. These are also in a very stable environment, right? So you're really using explosive tempos, trying to move as quickly as possible. I wrote phase 6. What am I doing with my life? Phase 5. So our example would include a medicine ball chest pass, okay? That would be a classic example of a resistance power exercise for the chest. And that is what really the end of like the resistance stuff. The big thing I want you guys to kind of focus on, because I know you guys know the program design stuff like crazy, really try to get like, work on these systems here. The general adaptation syndrome, know those phases for sure. And then like your principle of specificity differences, right? Mechanical, neuromuscular, and metabolic. Those are, here's a really tough thing. Are those things that you actually consider all that often when you're actually doing program design? You don't really tend to think about them because they become like instinct. They tend to happen naturally. You know what works once you get really good at program design. But they are where program design comes from. So I think they are some of the most important stuff to know. All right, so really quick, we do have our, actually, hold on, I gotta end the recording.